Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, the Maze Runner's Dylan O'Brien is being trained to become an American assassin. After his fiancée Katrina, played by Charlotte Vega, is killed in a terrorist attack at a beach resort, Mitch Rapp, played by Dylan O'Brien, spends the next 18 months single-mindedly tracking down the cell responsible to get his revenge. He attracts the attention of the CIA and its Deputy Director Irene Kennedy, played by Sana Lathan, who sees potential in Mitch and sends him into a rigorous training program run by Michael Keaton's Stan Hurley to become a Black Ops assassin. When a former protege of Hurley's named Ghost, played by Taylor Kitsch, intends to build a nuclear weapon, Mitch and Hurley are sent into the field to stop him. American Assassin is one of the books in the hugely successful Mitch Rapp series, which was written by Vince Flynn, who wrote 13 of the books in his lifetime, and the series continues on now posthumously. In 2008, Flynn signed a film deal for Rapp to be brought to the screen, and Hollywood spent many years trying to bring that project to fruition. Sadly, however, Flynn himself would not live to see that because he passed away in 2013. Now we have American Assassin the film, which is based off a later published book in the series in 2010, but it was a prequel entry. So clearly they've chosen this as a franchise starter with the idea of casting a young performer like Dylan O'Brien and having the main cast age with their characters as the series presumably progresses if it's successful. However, on this evidence, I don't see that entirely being the case. American Assassin is Dylan O'Brien's first film since he was very seriously injured on the set of Maze Runner The Death Cure in a stunt gone wrong, an incident so severe that he contemplated giving up acting altogether given he was very lucky to walk away with his life. And it seems like O'Brien has channeled many of those emotions onto the character of Mitch Rapp. We first meet Mitch on a beach proposing to his girlfriend. However, their engagement turns out to be short-lived because they're soon attacked by terrorists, and I found this opening to be somewhat distasteful because it's very clear that it's based on the Tunisian beach attack in 2015. I found that to be a little bit exploitative in co-opting a very real-life event like that. And both Rapp the character and O'Brien the actor have both experienced trauma, and what I think O'Brien brings to the role is this real raw surge of intensity which works with the character's utter devotion to vengeance. He's spent ever since then turning himself into a weapon, learning martial arts, learning firearms and the language and everything he can to integrate himself into the cell. And he does it entirely by himself, and he's successful because he's that fanatical. He's almost as fanatical as the people that he's chasing after. And while this is a little bit, exaggerated because of O'Brien's intensity, it brings a certain credibility to it. You believe that he's done this, at least in the early stages. However, that mission of revenge on his part ends up not entirely having the catharsis that he would like because the terrorist leader is swiftly killed by the CIA. And that ends up being a major conflict through the movie in that he has all this unresolved anger and he has to learn through the film to discipline himself. This is why the CIA wants Rapp in as a Black Ops agent, is because he already has the skills. He's proved that part. It's about using them. Unfortunately, Rapp has major problems with discipline and following orders, which apparently is a major trademark of the characters in the book. And the film is very much about trying to hone those skills and trying to decide what kind of agent that he wants to be. And O'Brien, I think, really shows that he can transition into more adult roles. I think this is exactly what American Assassin is meant to be for him, in that his series Teen Wolf that he co-stars in is ending, The Maze Runner is concluding, and he's trying to move into these more adult roles. And certainly this is a side that we haven't really seen before from him. So he's brought to Michael Keaton's Hurley to hone those skills, and Keaton is clearly having a ball of a time playing this character who is utterly crazy when you think about it. He's one part father figure, 3 parts drill sergeant. He's the sort of person that will fire a gun behind someone's head while they're fighting someone to simulate the distractions of the field, and then put said weapon into his mouth and fire empty to demonstrate what he should do should you end up being captured. Now, I don't know if that's really wise, considering that you had live ammunition in it a minute ago, but he's the professional, I guess. But he's utterly relishing playing this character that likes to push people's buttons. He's all about using the psychology of his trainees against them because they have to be impersonal, because that's what they have to be in the field. If they bring their baggage onto their missions, they'll become liabilities. So evidently he'll have a whale of a time with rap, and he does. He has to try and train that out of him, that sort of revenge side of his brain where every single terrorist he sees the terrorist that killed his girlfriend. He has to try and use that against him during the training process to try and get that out of him. And it just seems like he does this to everyone, really. You get the interactions with Sana Lathan's CIA deputy chief, and he treats her in an extremely degrading way, which I think is purely on account of the fact that she's a woman, given that he calls her Miss Deputy Chief, and the fact that she's younger than him, because he offhandedly says that he knew her father. Don't make me dislike Michael Keaton. Don't make me think he's a sexist jerk. Yeah, he can be a killer, but don't do that. Regardless, Keaton was one of the best parts of this film, and I really genuinely think I would have watched a movie gladly of Keaton as a spy fighting people in the Liam Neeson mould, as it were, because it seems from what we see in this movie that Keaton could handle himself, because as we all know, Keaton can be incredibly scary as a performer, and he really channels that here. And from what we see in this film, it looks like he can handle some of the physical stuff as well. Unfortunately, the movie doesn't really give him a lot of chances to do that. But there is one particularly great moment where he does manage to get his inner Mike Tyson out. But I'm glad that Keaton is having fun with this movie, because for a lot of it, I really wasn't. American Assassin is dreadfully pretentious, and a lot of it is really unearned, unfortunately. And once the movie reaches its midway point, I think that's really where it starts to properly fall apart, because once they're out in the field, it becomes yet another generic spy thriller that we've seen so many of in recent years, and it doesn't really distinguish itself in a lot of ways. It is the definition of generic, unfortunately. And what really doesn't help is that as the film goes on, its credibility gets less and less. You've got gaping plot holes, like the fact that at one point Mitch actually goes out entirely on his own to assassinate a bunch of people completely against his own orders. And you think, hang on a minute, wouldn't someone have noticed that he'd gone out for hours on end? Wouldn't he be seriously reprimanded for contravening a direct order like that? It's absurd, and the movie just continues on like this, just piling them up. And it would be one thing if it was sort of this throwaway action romp, but it's so serious, and it doesn't really have anything to back it up. The movie does have 4 different writers on it, including the director Edward Zwick, who was apparently attached to this project back in 2012. I mean, honestly, if you want to play it serious, then really address what you're bringing up in this movie, which is the idea of people being turned into weapons and the sort of morality of it. The film doesn't really want to engage with that idea on a properly direct level, which is a real shame, because essentially what Hurley is doing is basically torture. He is basically psychologically breaking these people. And you have this villain character played by Taylor Kitsch called Ghost, who is a former member of Hurley's training. And you've got this idea that he's this all-American, guy that has been brought through this process And he's been turned into a weapon for his country, but now he's been turned against America. He's been turned against his own land. And so you've got that going on. And because Kitsch and O'Brien look so similar to each other, there's obviously a deliberate attempt to try and mirror them, that they're two sides of the same coin. That would be great if Kitsch was in more than about 10 minutes of this movie, unfortunately. And really, what the ideal version of this film would have been in my mind is more of a direct cat and mouse game between these two characters, and really try to address the psychology of it, really, and what separates these two characters, what really separates them. But to be honest, I think that's purely because the movie realises that these characters at their centre are really amoral, given that they're just stone cold killers, and the only thing that properly divides them is their cause. The movie doesn't really have the actual sort of brass balls to address that theme directly. Its protagonist and its antagonist are almost one and the same. And that kind of self-reflection would have given this movie at least some kind of substance that it's clearly crying out for, especially considering the supporting cast is full of these one-note blank slates, like Sana Lathan's deputy chief, who is just walking exposition. David Suchet just walks on for his paycheck. And elsewhere, we have this Turkish agent who accompanies the CIA while they're in Istanbul and follows them over to Rome, and she's played by Shiva Nagar, who tries to bring something to this role. I think she's really committed to it, but it offers nothing to her because we don't really learn much about her. She's basically meant to be this female counterpart to Rap, and at least the movie luckily tries to avoid some sort of love interest angle, at least on that front, which makes sense given the impersonality of the actual fieldwork of this movie. But the film does try to do something with this character later on, but it's totally needless. It throws in this reveal, I guess, but it doesn't really change the stakes of what's happening. It's one of those twists that feels like it's been bolted onto a movie to make it seem like more is happening in it than it really is. You could take this out of the movie and it wouldn't affect what happens in the rest of it at all. Nothing about it needs to be there. It's so needless and so pointless. But really, the biggest shame in my eyes is that you get Scott Adkins in this movie, direct-to-video star Scott Adkins, and he's basically a bit player in this film. He's another member of Hurley's training regime that accompanies them out on this mission, and suffice to say, he doesn't last very long. What a waste of your Scott Adkins. But that emptiness makes sense in a movie that seems to largely define itself by its violence. This is a movie where I think the filmmakers have approached the material with a sense of realism and authenticity, that they're trying to give you a sense of what it's like to be on these Black Ops missions, and individually, sequences do work in that fashion. The opening scene, for example, I do think, despite my reservations, it's very effectively filmed because it follows Mitch in this extended take tracking shot as he struggles to get back to his girlfriend in the midst of these fleeing people, and as the bullets are flying around, and it almost places you like a POV shot right in the centre of the action. It really gives you a sense of what it's like to be thrust in the middle of that situation, and it's terrifying and disturbing, and it's really puts across how scary that is. And the fact that it happens so abruptly, so suddenly, and gave me a real jolt, underlines that anyone could end up in that situation should they be unfortunate enough to happen, and any one of us could become Mitch under those kind of circumstances. And on that level, the film works, but so much of the rest of the film seems to be getting a little bit of a giddy thrill out of its own sadism. It really seems very enamoured with the process of violence. You've got scenes like the one where Keaton is training his students on the correct way of knifing someone in the throat. Apparently you don't slash someone, that's only in the movies. No, you punch it right in. And the movie seems to get a little bit of a sick thrill out of this, like we've learned a little bit of a trade secret here. And so much of the movie's action sequences seem to be designed around, okay, how much blood and claret can we spill on these carpets? How much grue can we really, show off on screen? I mean, I can't say I've seen another action film where someone's broken arm blood squirts right onto the camera. I'm not sure I really wanted that either. And this is not me being prudish or squeamish, I love action movies. But it really seems like American Assassin very much is a bit infatuated with its violence to an uncomfortably disturbing degree. And I don't consider that to be realistic or gritty. I just find that just nasty and unpleasant, to be perfectly honest. Oh joy! An extended torture scene with lots of loving close-ups of people having their nails pulled out of their fingertips with a pair of pliers. I really, really love those kind of scenes. And they place so much emphasis on gory moments that they forget to make the action scenes memorable in any other way. A lot of it is stock post-born kind of fight scenes that just happen to have a bit more marinara sauce spilled around. The movie takes a severe downturn on the action front in its third act because so much of it is set in these dark underground tunnels, which, first of all, aesthetically speaking, is a really boring setting for what is meant to be the climax of your movie, and secondly, it's so dimly lit I can't see anything. You can't see any of the action, you can't really work out where the characters are in proximity to each other. It's just a bit of a mess, to be perfectly honest. And then, once we are back in the daylight, it's for this awful CGI finale, and I do mean awful CGI. You just have to look at those PlayStation 3 under-rendered battleships going against these huge giant waves. It looks completely preposterous. If this was a movie that aspires to be realistic, this should be laughed off the screen, really. And it's at this point that I realise that what this movie really is Broken Arrow with a superiority complex. American Assassin is very mediocre filmmaking on a lot of levels. A lot of it is frankly forgettable despite the efforts of its stars. But really, the soul-defining thing that I think I will remember about it is just how ludicrously over the top in regards to its violence it really is, and that just kind of makes it unsettling. It's the definition of proficient, but it leaves you with a really awful taste in the mouth. If you want this kind of action movie, go watch John Wick again. American Assassin may have an intense and committed performance by Dylan O'Brien, but even that can't get the job done with this tedious, very self-serious actioner. The movie is under the mistaken impression that because it tries to create an air of authenticity about the way it handles its action, that makes it gritty and intense, when in actuality it's simply nasty and ugly, seemingly only concerned with how much blood its characters can spill and a fixation on the process of violence. The movie never deeply tries to explore the morality and ethics of its characters, squandering Taylor Kitsch's villain in the process, and only Michael Keaton's crazed mentor seems to be having any kind of fun. Any pretense of realism goes out of the window by its risible CGI-heavy climax that shows just how ridiculous it really is. But even the set pieces merely being competent if gorily handled, American Assassin manages to be a total mediocrity marked by unpleasantness. If you like this review, your next assignment is my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, but until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.
This is just the beginning.